It's the week ending Saturday the 3rd of February, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Donald Trump presenting his State of the Union address, leaks from the UK government showing the full impact of Brexit, and the founder of IKEA dying at the age of 91. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. The big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Arion McNicoll. Let's unwrap the week. And Ollie is on holiday this week, so with me from the week's digital team are Jamie Timson, Rebecca Gillie and Cameron Tait. And to start the show this week, it's Jamie. Jamie, what's this week going to be remembered for?
This was the week they really were blessing the rains down in Africa.
Cape Town may be the first city in the world to run out of water. This could happen as soon as April 12th, a day that officials are calling Day Zero. We're talking about Cape Town's 4 million residents losing running water to their homes.
What that means is when people turn the tap on or the shower on, there is no water.
In order to avert Day Zero, officials are urging residents to use less than 23 gallons of water per day. To give you some context, the average American uses 100 gallons of water per person per day.
That was journalist E.A. Crunden reporting for the Think Progress YouTube channel. Jamie, Cape Town is running out of water. There's even a deadline called Day Zero, which we just heard there. Sounds like a zombie apocalyptic movie or something. What's the story here?
It could be that bad. I think we are looking at a real crisis. They are experiencing the worst drought on record in Cape Town in South Africa. It's been going on for the past 3 years. The population in Cape Town has grown by something like 80% since 1995. Those two things have correlated to the point where they've run out of water.
So is it more about the lack of rain, or is it more about the swelling population?
I mean, obviously it's a combination, as with all questions, as to sound like a history GCSE. It is a combination of the two, but a lot of the time the issue with the water supply is that although they don't have enough water, often the areas of water aren't being conserved enough. So a lot of the water that they are using, they're not pumping back into the system. So actually a lot of human interaction with water has been the cause of the issue. What we're looking at is Day Zero, which is when they believe that there will be restrictions on water placed by the government. The city's 4 million residents will then be allocated 25 litres of water a day. For comparison, UK residents use 150 litres of water a day. So
presumably people are heeding the warning and they're conserving more water in the lead up to Day Zero.
Yes, but as with all things in the world, there's a slight disparity between the haves and the have-not. The haves in this situation, a lot of the government members, a lot of the richer people, they seem to have been stockpiling their water and have a version of a deal with water suppliers to be able to get hold of water, whereas the have-nots are queuing in the streets and are pretty worried. Water has started to become sold on the black market. There was an interesting article recently saying that for a lot of people, it's very similar to Bitcoin, which I know, Cam, you'll be interested. Just the mention of the word and your ears prick up. And so what we are seeing here is a kind of manifestation of quite a lot of South Africa's problems.
So, I mean, you can blame the country itself, but to an extent what we're looking at is problems that are broader than this, specifically climate change, right?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't just been happening in Cape Town. It's been happening in some Brazilian cities as well. Notably, Brasilia has had really similar problems. And I think the underreporting of it has been crazy. And I think that probably the reason is that particularly in the developed world, there is a perception of Africa, drought, the infrastructure, is substandard compared to what we have in the developed world. So this is just a thing that might just happen there. But the thing is that Cape Town actually has gone to a lot of effort to conserve water. It's won international prizes for its conservation of water and for the techniques that it's developed to try and avoid this exact scenario.
Yeah, often referred to as a green city in the past.
Yeah, so. And in 2014, the dams that hold the city's water were full, and now they are almost empty. It goes beyond just a case of, this could never happen in a fully developed country because we'd come up with technology to get around it, because they actually have come up with technology and no one could see this coming.
When you have a disaster like this, you can often think of technology to come up with some solution. It's almost like if you had a power crisis, you could say, let's get some solar panels in there and generate more power. But with water, I cannot think of a single piece of technology that would help bring it into an area that has drought, especially if it's inland, because then again you're using masses of energy to get it over there.
Well,
I can't think of a way around it.
Desalination plants are one thing, but I gather they take a long time to
create.
create.
They're under construction now, but they estimate that it's going to take between 3 and 5 years. From what I've read, it's going to be very difficult to get desalination going on a scale that's going to support this enormously growing city. And I think we're just going to see more instances like this in other cities around the world. Like, I mean, even now they've got police posted at one of the natural springs in Cape Town because people are trying to get there and get as much water as possible.
Yeah.
And that's only going to get more frenzied.
It's going to act as a sort of weird test case for future cities if this was to occur elsewhere. But Jamie, you have one of your trademark theories about this water shortage. Tell us what you think is going to happen elsewhere or how this relates.
I certainly think this is a kind of precursor for what I think will be the big issues certainly in the 21st century as we progress, will be the fights over water and water shortages. NASA released a study last year that showed that of the kind of 31 main water sources on Earth, 17 of them were distressed, mainly due to human interaction with them. One particular example, which is just sparking up now, is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's a conflict over the building of that. Not to provide too much of a history lesson, but basically Egypt for quite a long time has had the lion's share of the Nile River, generally because the feeling is that Egypt doesn't get as much rain as the rest of the other countries in Africa. Now there's been a bit of a push, mainly led by Ethiopia, to try and maybe reevaluate looking at how much of the Nile Egypt gets. Egypt's not particularly that keen on that because they're a bit worried about water shortages like we all are. Turkey and Qatar have picked sides effectively, and there is a chance that we could be looking at the first conflict over water building up because they have, I think it was in 2015, they tried to have a diplomatic response to it or a way to sort it out, and that just didn't come to pass.
I think this is actually quite interesting because it can really go in one of two directions, or three. You could have the non-conflict route. Everyone finds an agreement, and I can't see that happening anytime soon. Then I think you could have an intercontinental war. You've got all the countries, especially around the Nile, that could start a conflict. But in that sense, you really cannot see anybody winning. And if someone does win, then you really are damaging every other country around them. The only way I think it could spark into a world war is if Russia and America got involved. And I understand that America has been giving a bit of a blind eye to the situation. And if Putin steps in, we could see something really kind of escalate out of control.
I mean, one of the problems here is that America has allies on both sides of the disagreement, right? Not to mention the fact that the Trump administration has kind of hollowed out its foreign policy department. So it's really hard to see how the Rex Tillersons even have enough staff to deal with this, particularly when they're facing plenty of other problems worldwide. What will America do, if anything, in that particular case?
I don't think there's a kind of a real answer. You know, Egypt is a long-time partner of the US. Trump's isolationism, it has been a kind of key part of his first year, you know, certainly holding back in terms of stepping in many other places. But as Cam says, Russia would just see it as an open goal in terms of being able to go in there and sort it out and say, hey, look, you know, we can stop this from becoming a conflict, or indeed starting one itself. I think what's interesting, just going back onto the water issue about how we can change as a world. I mean, there was something like an American pays $3 a day, I think it was, for their 150 gallons a day of water, whereas in Papua New Guinea they spend the same amount for the minimum under human rights, which I think was about 13 gallons. And you have to look at why is it, as Rebecca was saying, that we don't see water as being such an issue, and it's probably because of how cheap it is for us when we use it, you know, whereas if we were having to spend what is a much higher proportion of our income on water, we would see how much of a valuable commodity it is.
So you think that we need to introduce more payment for water?
Yeah, I mean, hiking up prices on water is a difficult one to propose, I guess. I guess the thing that you have to say is that actually maybe we have been getting things for too cheap. You only have to look at what's happened with oil to realise that actually perhaps we have been experiencing a much better situation than perhaps we were rightfully due.
And I guess we really do take water for granted as well. It is something that it is vital to us, but we get it so easily. And again, from the news that's coming out of Cape Town, it sounds almost like post-apocalyptic situation.
So I guess we'll see what happens when day zero comes about. Next up, it's Rebecca to test other waters. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Supply-side economics have never been so sexy.
Well, I must apologise for calling you a sex god. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry, I was mildly embarrassed but enormously flattered, so thank you.
Not at all. So we're here today. We're filming a piece on Churchill.
That was Georgia Toffolo, otherwise known as Toff, speaking to Jacob Rees-Mogg on ITV's This Morning earlier this month in pretty much the poshest exchange of all time. Rebecca, what's happened this week?
So this week, a study has come out of the US which has found that people who are rated as attractive are more likely to embrace right-wing ideology, specifically because this is a US-based study, to identify with the Republican Party. And the interesting thing about this is that you may think, well, that makes sense because wealthier people tend to skew more conservative, and if you've got lots of money to spend on your appearance, you might look slightly better. But this is true even when they control for socioeconomic factors. And the reason that the researchers believe that this is a thing is because of something called the halo effect, which is a cognitive bias where one positive attribute, so in this case physical beauty, subconsciously makes people associate other attributes with you. For instance, intelligence, talent. And so the argument goes that if you're beautiful, you'll be treated better by the people around you and you have a more positive impression of the world and you think, you know what, I'm doing okay. Why can't other people get ahead? It creates arguably an empathy gap, which makes them less sympathetic towards government initiatives.
It's such a weird story. The thing that caught my attention about it was that the idea seemed to be that your worldview or your political view is formed primarily by how people respond to you in your lifetime, rather than, say, your upbringing or what your parents think or the politics that you're given in school or at university. Isn't it a bit weird to think that it's all based on how people treat you during your life?
I think that really, one of the things I really loved about the story is I think it does hit on that is a fundamental truth. You know, we're all familiar with the concept of privilege these days. It does get talked about. But for instance, your race, we always hear that race is a construct. Race is really just a function of how people around you respond to you. And so we've known for a long time that, people of ethnic minorities are more likely to vote for progressive parties, at least, in Europe and the US. And part of that is because if you have a more hostile reaction from society at large, you're more likely to be sympathetic to government initiatives to help underprivileged people and not to want to rely on the individual.
I mean, another massive assumption of this study is that life is necessarily easier for attractive people. Is there any evidence in this study to back that up, or is that kind of resting on previous studies?
No, so these researchers, Rolf Peterson and Kyle Parker, they've worked together on the halo effect before. So a lot of their research goes into how the halo effect, they're both political scientists, and how the halo effect affects politics. For instance, they've done a previous study that found that people who are good looking are also assumed to be knowledgeable about politics.
Cameron.
At the end of the day, while we think we are an incredibly advanced race, the human race itself is actually incredibly primitive. So the idea that we still base our assumptions on how people look, it's completely true. We do see people who are physically attractive and just presume they have more power, and that just builds to their aura, really.
I mean, does this bear out in the politicians that we see before us? Do we think that there's a notable attractiveness about conservatives versus liberals?
Yes.
Go ahead. Who, Jamie?
Up. Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump, obviously an attractive man. David Cameron. Well, he had a fresh look about him, didn't he? I think it's actually kind of contradicted in certainly the most attractive politician that I know, Justin Trudeau. He is not conservative. I mean, he's obviously more conservative than, say, Jeremy Corbyn, but certainly he's centre-left by their politics, I would say. There was quite a handy, in the Guardian article, which had the very amusing headline of Hunky Tory, there was a comment where a heterosexual male, as he described himself, had listed all of who he thought were the most attractive politicians throughout the Western world. And actually, it was a complete mixed bag. Some were Liberal Democrats, some were kind of further right-wing.
But actually, this is not as much of a contradiction as it seems, because attractive people are disproportionately overrepresented in public positions, including politics. So even though, when you think about it, it may not seem the case, theoretically, it shouldn't be a surprise if politicians of all parties are more attractive than the average.
Do you also think that maybe people are viewed as being more attractive because of their position of power? Like, is it a chicken and egg thing? As in, like, I'm sure that if I walked past Justin Trudeau in the street, I might think, But now I'm thinking, ooh.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on how you look at what makes somebody attractive. I mean, there's being attractive and then there's being physically attractive. I think a lot of people don't think that President Trump is physically attractive. I'm sorry if you're listening, Trump, but well, I think a lot of people don't think that. But it's his position of power that I think that makes him attractive and what draws people to him. And I think you've got something similar with Boris Johnson. Actually, you have someone that is so British and is so confidently British, and I think that's what draws people towards him.
I mean, we're sort of confusing the point here a bit, conflating attractiveness with being a conservative politician. And actually, it's the argument from this study was saying that people who are attractive just end up being conservative-minded and voting conservative.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, really, for the conservative-leaning voters, because there is a bit of a pushback at the moment against the idea of the nasty Tories and against the idea that conservatives lack empathy. There's a push to kind of regain the image of, we think that our policies will be better for everyone in the long run. But this study seems to indicate that having let's say, an easier ride in life is associated with tending more towards right-wing politics, which obviously emphasise pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, which these US researchers argue is significantly easier if you're genetically blessed. And I think there's certainly a lot of truth to that.
Having been to a meeting of socialists in southeast London, I can probably say that, well, it wasn't a bed of roses.
That said, Tom Whipple, who was writing about this very same story in The Times, attended a Young Tories conference, and he could also bear witness.
Maybe anyone that's interested in politics and is young just isn't
not actually attractive. Yeah, the attractive people are out sunning themselves on beaches like Ollie Mann. And finally this week, it's Cameron. What do you think this week's going to be remembered for?
Well, experts warned that AI would take over the world, and now it is.
What is your reaction to the quasi-controversy around the use of Peter Cushing as a CGI character for Grand Moff Tarkin? A lot of people had a very kind of strange reaction to that.
It's fair enough, and you should tread carefully around this area. We spoke to Peter Cushing's estate and asked them, how do you feel about this? And they were okay with it. And then the real challenge became, can you do it? They were the last shots that ended up in the film. And, we're just working on them and criticising them. And we were really hard on it, and we were paranoid that it was, never going to be good enough.
Right.
That was Gareth Edwards, the director of Star Wars Rogue One, talking to CNN Money last year. Cameron, CGI has been reproducing people's faces for a while. Nothing new there. What's happening now?
Well, in that case, it was quite interesting because they were able to revive an actor who sadly passed away in 1994 to reprise his role as Grand Moff Tarkin in Star Wars. But in 2018, we're looking at something quite different. There's a trend that's been occurring on the chat forum Reddit that basically a user who goes by the name of Deepfakes is creating fake celebrity pornography using artificial intelligence.
I mean, aside from the legalities, and we'll get to that in a moment, it just sounds pretty tacky and not terribly appealing.
It sounds absolutely absurd when you first hear it, and you think, who on earth would be interested in this? So this kind of originally kicked off in December, and he started creating them by himself, but then he's built up quite the following, 15,000 subscribers to be precise, and now people are starting to use apps they can just download onto their computer to create their own pornography at home, and now they're sharing it online.
So Cam, take us through the science of this.
The way it works is you'll download a piece of software, and apparently it's very simple to use. I'm not one for programming, but apparently it's very simple to use. What you do is you find a piece of source imagery, porn, you load it into the program. Basically, these programs will sift through thousands of source images and videos of celebrities. Then what the computer does is it manages to take the face of one of these celebrities, put it over the performer, let's call them, and there you go. You have yourself a fake celebrity porn video, and they are remarkably realistic.
So I think we can all at least agree that there's probably a market for this, right?
Probably.
Yes. I mean, one of the things about this is, people have the immediate reaction has been, this is so disgusting and perverted and wrong. But I mean, people fantasize about celebrities, and I mean, of course there's a market for it. When you're sat, in the office talking about it, of course you're like, oh, this is disgusting. Who would ever be interested in that? But if you're sat at home at night on your computer and you see a link and you're like, I'll just check that out, I can see how it's got this amazing, huge following so quickly.
Cam, did you go home and continue your research after office hours?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't, so I'm very ill-prepared for this. But I do know that some of the celebrities that are included in it do include the Daisy Ridley from Star Wars and Jennifer Lawrence. So it is people that you would recognise if you were...
Is it all female so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the thing. Yeah. The interesting thing, you mentioned Jennifer Lawrence, who was one of the female celebrities who was caught up in the leaks of nude photos and videos that we, made headlines a while back. And so you could argue to some extent that as long as these technological flaws exist, the female celebrities are always at risk of having their real bodies exposed. And so perhaps it is less harmful if people are just making what everyone knows are fake mock-up videos featuring those celebrities rather than trying to access their own private images.
These things have always existed as well, right? I'm sure before the technology existed, you would have like lookalikes or even really crude Photoshop versions of this. I mean, the problem is the realism factor, right? The fact is that the technology makes it look so realistic.
And here's the thing. If you see Daisy Ridley with like 5 guys in a copy room on a video, she's one of the most famous actresses in the world. Obviously that's not really her.
Do you though?
But, you watch it, that you're watching a fake. I know a handful of people might believe it, but overwhelmingly people would know it wasn't real. However, if you've got like loads of pictures of your ex-girlfriend, you put those faces on a porn star's body and you send a copy to her boss, like when it starts involving real people, we've heard so much about revenge porn, there's nothing stopping you from doing this with an ordinary person and sending it to everyone you know.
And I think the further problem presumably is if there's an AI element that things start to get remixed in weird ways. Rebecca, a while ago you spoke about the peculiarity of children's shows showing up algorithmic new creations created entirely by AI. I mean, presumably now celebrity faces are going to be found on all sorts of pornographic content.
Yeah.
I mean, it's opening a very peculiar and dark
now
gateway.
That a lot of people are trying to use this software by themselves and come up with their own creations, there's a lot of glitch versions going around which are truly horrifying.
Talk us through that.
Where people have attempted to graft a celebrity's face onto a porn star's body and instead they've just created like a horrifying, terrible monster. But they're still putting them online now. I think they obviously think there's a market. But there is also a fun side to this phenomenon.
To Frankenporn.
To Frankenporn. Not a pornographic one. I'm just saying that there is a way this technology could be repurposed for good, which is that a video is going around where people have put Nicolas Cage in a bunch of movies that he wasn't actually in.
Lovely.
It's done really well and it's very funny, and I think that there is a wholesome, possibly, use for this AI technology.
Like, say, removing Kevin Spacey from any films that he has been in previously to make
American
them watchable.
Beauty is a very different film without Kevin Spacey.
With Nicolas Cage in the lead role.
Do you know how, when they do the German and French, whatever dubs of films, they use the same actor every time? I think after what happened with All the Money in the World, they should just get Christopher Plummer to go and do
everything.
All of the Kevin Spacey films.
Spacey's back catalogue. Yeah. Jamie, talk to me about the legality of using someone's image.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of wider repercussions thing is really interesting about this technology, particularly as when we are moving forward and we are putting ourselves online more and more. At some point, obviously, my Instagram page and my Facebook page are representations of myself that aren't necessarily me. But if we start creating avatars, as I believe in the future, we will start creating avatars that represent ourselves online to the same extent that we are represented in real life. You only have to look at things like Black Mirror to see how that could manifest itself. It really brings up some questions about the legality and legal rights of you and your image. At the moment, you would say that this was completely invasive for these things to be created. But say it was a virtual recreation of me being put in these situations. Do we treat the virtual recreation of me as having the same rights as the human recreation of me?
Well, there are some guidelines as to what is legal and illegal in this case, and there is, as you might guess, it is very illegal on quite a lot of terms. So the images can really only come if they're sourced online. So if they are online, you're in breach of data protection. Someone's scissoring your face and putting it onto the body of somebody else. So you're in violation of data protection. There's also defamation. So if I was a celebrity and I was involved in one of these videos, I could sue the content creator because they may have damaged my public image. And finally, you can also do them for harassment.
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about this in the past, the idea that people even, well, not in this room, but on this podcast, both Ashley and Ollie ended up having their faces used on advertising in the Far East, I believe, and their slight discomfort about that. Are there situations where your image, your personality, something about you, could show up in, say, a remix of a film, for example, not a pornographic film, and you'd be okay with it?
Yeah, I think actually that if one change that it does make to people's lives that this kind of thing does throw up is the idea of everyone just being much more aware of the information that we do put out there. You know, I strongly believe that if you are willing to, as I have done in the past, give up so much personal information to so many different places, I can't turn around when I'm surprised when it's being used for nefarious reasons in China.
We could all become a bit more aware of how we use our data, or conversely, this kind of thing could just become so normalized to the point where, you know, walking into your room to find your computers onto a, you know, pornographic video with your face could just become, you know, the latest prank that housemates are playing on each other.
Great prank.
Yeah. I guess it depends on the situation, really. If it's something if it's kind of like a light-hearted advert that's occurring in some country, then I guess you could laugh at it. But pornography, I'd be a little bit upset, to say the least.
As long as it's a light-hearted, hardcore porn scenario, I think that we can all agree that's okay. Well, that's it for this week. My thanks to Cameron Tait, Rebecca Gillie and Jamie Timson. For more from The Week, why not visit theweek.co.uk, where you can also sign up to our free email newsletter, The Weekday, or you can have the magazine delivered direct to your door. Just head to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. Remember, you can get every episode of this podcast as soon as it's published. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your podcast app of choice. I've been Arion McNicoll. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer is Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, goodbye.